The last thing my dad said to me before he shut the door was, "You should have thought about that before." That was it. No big speech. No blow-up. Just those 8 words, cold and flat, like he was reading off a receipt, and then the click of the latch, and then the sound of rain. Not regular Ohio rain either. I'm talking about the kind of storm that sounds like a freight train on the roof. The kind where you can't even see the end of the driveway. And I was standing on our front porch in a thin zip-up jacket with $22 in my pocket and absolutely nowhere to go. I was 14 years old, a 9th grader at Jefferson Middle High. I had a book report due Monday. I stood there for a second.
2.
I kept waiting for the door to swing back open. Kept expecting to hear my mom or even my brother Theo, or just something. Some kind of, "Okay, that's enough, come back inside." The thing you figure has to happen because this isn't something families actually do to their kids. The door did not open. So I stepped off that porch into the rain. And I want you to really sit with what that felt like. Not just the cold hitting you all at once, not just your sneakers soaking through in the first 10 seconds, but that specific, horrible feeling of walking away from your own house, knowing the people inside made a choice. And the choice wasn't you. That night changed my whole life. And the person who ended up saving me? The absolute last person my dad would have ever wanted me to run to. When he finally figured out whose door I'd knocked on, the look on his face was something I will never, ever forget. But let me back up, because you need to know who we were before any of this makes sense. My dad's name was Gerald. Gerald Marsh. Big guy, not huge, but the kind of man who takes up space in a room just by being in it, you know what I mean? He worked in logistics for one of those big distribution companies outside Columbus, Ohio. Long days, early mornings, always tired by the time he got home, never had a lot of patience left over. He was the kind of dad who coached Little League and showed up to parent-teacher conferences and genuinely believed he was doing right by his family. He wasn't some monster. I need you to understand that. But he had this thing where once he decided what was true, he locked in. And once Gerald Marsh locked in on something, that was it. No appeals. Case closed. My mom's name was Diane. She was the softer one, or at least she looked that way. She made banana bread on Sunday mornings. She watched Hallmark Christmas movies starting in October, which used to drive my dad crazy. She gave good hugs. But here's the thing about soft people who are actually pretty hard underneath. They're harder to argue with because they never raise their voice. My mom just went quiet and looked away, and somehow that hurt way more than yelling ever would have. She loved us. I do believe that, but she loved us in order. First came Theo. Then came what the neighbors thought. Then came the rest of the world. I had figured out by 5th grade which bucket I was in. My brother's name was Theo. 12 years old, 2 years younger than me, blonde and charming in the way certain kids just are, naturally, effortlessly, without trying. Teachers liked him. Neighbors liked him. He was the kid adults called a real character, like that was a compliment. And look, I loved my brother.
I want to be upfront about that.
But Theo had figured out something early that most kids don't figure out until way later, that the person who cries first usually wins. That looking small at the right moment can get you out of almost anything. That if something went wrong and you needed a scapegoat, all you had to do was point and look sad enough.
He was 12.
And he was already really good at it. And then there was me, Claire Marsh, 14. Brown hair that never did what I wanted it to do. Glasses since 2nd grade, the kind my dad called smart-looking, which was not the compliment he thought it was. I was the kid who read too much and talked too little. I kept a journal. I had a playlist for every mood. I was not the kind of girl who stirred the pot. I kept my head down. I did my homework without being asked and went to my room and tried not to take up too much space. That last part, I think, was part of the problem. I'd gotten so good at being invisible that when Theo pointed at me, when he looked my dad dead in the eyes and said what he said, nobody stopped long enough to question it. The storm had been building since that afternoon. I remember watching it roll in from my bedroom window, the sky going from regular gray to that deep purple green that means business. Thunder way off in the distance, low and rolling like a semi-downshifting on the highway. I had a weird feeling all afternoon I couldn't shake. Not scared, exactly. Just still, like the whole house was holding its breath. I came downstairs at 6 for dinner, same as always. That was when everything blew up. The dinner table was dead quiet when I sat down. That alone should have been my first red flag. Our dinner table was never quiet. My dad always had something going, talking about work, complaining about traffic on 270, whatever game was on later. My mom always had some neighborhood story or something she needed us to remember. Theo always had some dumb bit he'd seen on YouTube or some drama from school. But that night, nothing. My dad sat at the head of the table with his arms crossed. That posture, right there, meant he'd already made up his mind about something. My mom had her back to me at the counter, messing with dishes in a way that didn't actually need doing. And Theo was sitting across from me with his eyes down, his bottom lip doing that specific wobble it did when he was running a play. "Claire," my dad said. Just my name. One word. But the way he said it, slow and deliberate, like he was setting something breakable down real careful. I felt a drop straight into my stomach. "What?" I said. "You want to explain what happened today?" I genuinely had no idea what he was talking about.
0.
I'd come home from school, done homework, watched the storm come in from my window. I hadn't even left my room except to grab a snack.
I said exactly that. My dad looked at Theo.
My mom turned around from the counter. And Theo, 12-year-old Theo with the perfect blonde hair and the wobbling lip, looked up at my dad with wet eyes and said, "She broke my model. The one Grandpa made me. She came into my room and knocked it off the shelf on purpose. And when I told her to quit it, she shoved me." The model. I knew exactly which one he meant. A hand-painted wooden sailboat, about 18 inches long, that our grandfather had made by hand and given to Theo on his 10th birthday. Grandpa had been a woodworker his whole life. Old school guy, actual workshop in the garage. Always smelled like sawdust and linseed oil. He'd passed away 8 months before. That boat was the last thing he'd ever made for our family. There was no replacing it. There was no finding another one. It was gone. My jaw dropped. "I was not in your room," I said.
"You were," Theo said.
Quiet. Steady. The kind of steady that takes practice to fake. "I was in the bathroom. I saw you through the door when I came back." "That is not. The model is in pieces," my dad cut in. "I saw it myself. And here's the part one really need you to hear because this is the part that still knocks the wind out of me. The model really was broken. Sitting in pieces on Theo's dresser. I had not broken it, never touched it, never went near it, but it was broken and Theo knew that and I knew that and none of that mattered even a little. Because my dad had already decided.
Jury was in.
Verdict done. "Apologize to your brother," he said. "I didn't do anything." "Claire." "Dad, I was in my room the whole afternoon. I literally never went near his." I said apologize. There are moments where the unfairness of something is so sharp and so obvious that you feel it physically, like something pressing on the inside of your chest. I felt it right then. And I know the smart play would have been to just bite the bullet, say sorry, let it slide. I'd done that before, plenty of times. But I was 14, I was exhausted, and something in me had just had it. "I am not apologizing for something I didn't do," I said. My dad pushed back from the table. My mom covered her mouth with her hand. Theo looked down at his plate, and for just half a second before the lips started wobbling again, his expression was something totally different. Something that wasn't grief at all. "Go to your room," my dad said. "Tomorrow you apologize or there are consequences." I went upstairs. Sat on my bed. The storm was picking up, rain starting to hit the windows sideways, thunder rolling closer. I told myself to breathe. Told myself this would blow over by morning. I was dead wrong. Before I tell you what came next, I need you to understand something. That night wasn't some random thing that came out of nowhere. It was the end of a road that had been building for years. I know people want these stories to be simple. Either your family was terrible or they weren't. But it wasn't like that. My dad loved us. My mom loved us. We went to church on Easter, did cookouts on the 4th of July, took a road trip every summer. Usually somewhere like Gatlinburg or Myrtle Beach, the kind of trip where you eat at Cracker Barrel on the way there and argue about the AUX chord the whole drive. We were a regular American family, in almost every way, except for one thing nobody ever said out loud. Theo had been sick as a baby. Nothing fatal, but scary. 2 hospital stays before his 2nd birthday, some respiratory thing the pediatricians kept monitoring until he was around 4. I don't remember any of it. I was too little, but I grew up in the shadow of it. Because something about those early years had settled into my parents in a permanent way, especially my dad. Theo needed protecting. Theo needed watching. And because I was the healthy one, the easy one, the kid who never scared anybody, I was, without anyone ever having a meeting about it, the one who needed less. The one who needs less. That's a rough thing to be when you're a kid who needs things just as much as any other kid. I kept a mental list. I'm not proud of it, but I kept it. The time my 6th grade play fell on the same night as Theo's travel soccer tournament, and my parents went to the tournament. The time I got the top grade in my whole class on a science fair project and my dad said good job and then spent 20 minutes on the phone with Theo's baseball coach about tryouts. The time I ran a 102-degree fever for 4 days and my mom checked on me twice total, while the next month she parked herself on the couch every night for a week when Theo had a regular cold. None of it was dramatic. That was the thing. It was just steady and constant, like background noise you eventually stop registering. By 6th grade, I'd stopped expecting different. By 7th grade, I'd stopped feeling hurt by specific moments. I just accepted the deal. Claire is the secondary kid. That's just how this family runs. What I hadn't given up on was basic fairness. I still believed that if something was clearly false, the truth would eventually matter to somebody. That was my mistake. There was a woman who lived 3 houses down from us on Birchwood Court. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Carroll. Late 50s, retired schoolteacher, widowed, kept the best-looking yard on the whole block. The kind of house where the flower beds were actually color-coordinated and the hedges were always trimmed. She left a tin of homemade cookies on her front porch on the 1st of every month. No note, just cookies, for whoever walked by. She was that type of woman. My dad had a whole thing with her. 2 years before, she'd filed a complaint with the city over a property line dispute, said our fence was 6 inches over onto her lot. She was right, technically and legally, and my dad had to move the fence. He never fully got over it. In his mind, it wasn't about the 6 inches. It was that she'd gone straight to the city instead of coming to knock on his door like a neighbor. He called her that woman down the street and made it clear we weren't to hang around on her property. I'd always thought that was kind of unfair, honestly. She'd been nothing but nice to me. Waved every morning when I walked to school. One time, when I was in 6th grade, she stopped me on the sidewalk completely out of nowhere and said, "You seem like a really thoughtful girl, Claire." Just said it. Like she meant it. I thought about that more times than made any logical sense. The storm was full-on angry by the time my dad opened my bedroom door that night. Rain hammering the windows, thunder right overhead, the whole house vibrating with it. He stood in the doorway. "Your brother has been crying for an hour. Your grandfather's gift is in pieces. And you won't even say you're sorry. Because I didn't do it. This conversation is over. Tomorrow you come downstairs and fix this, or you are not going to like what happens." He shut the door. I sat there in the dark listening to the storm, running through every option I had, so deep in my own head that I didn't hear Theo in the hallway. Didn't hear him ease my door open just enough to say, almost a whisper, "You should have just said sorry, Claire." I should have asked him exactly what he meant by that. I should have pushed right then. I didn't. An hour later, I found out the hard way. My dad didn't wait for morning. That's the thing that caught me completely off guard. I'd been mentally preparing for the morning version of this. I knew how it usually went: quiet breakfast, another round of the same argument, and eventually the silence my dad could read as me giving in, even if I never actually said the word. I'd done that dance before. I knew the moves. But at 9:30, I heard my parents talking downstairs. Not fighting, my parents didn't fight loud. They talked low, like they were running through a checklist, like the decision had already been made and they were just walking through the logistics. I sat on my bed and listened to the sound of it without catching any actual words. Then my mom came upstairs. She knocked once, which she almost never did, opened my door without fully looking at me. "Your dad wants you downstairs." Theo was on the couch in his Star Wars pajamas pretending to read a Captain Underpants book and doing a terrible job of it. My dad was standing by the front door with his arms crossed. The storm was in full swing, rain just hammering the porch roof, the oak tree in the front yard completely sideways in the window's reflection. "I've thought about this," my dad said, like he was presenting a quarterly report. Like this was measured and reasonable. "And I think you need to understand that this kind of behavior has a real cost." "Dad, I didn't. I'm not going through this again." Flat and final. Zero room. "You're going to Aunt Patricia's tonight." Already called her. Aunt Patricia lived 40 minutes away. Out past Lancaster, off Route 40. "It's pouring outside," I said. "Then you should have thought about that before you decided to act like this." The bottom just dropped out of my stomach. I looked at my mom. She met my eyes for exactly 1 second and then looked at some spot past my shoulder, and I just knew, she wasn't going to say a word. She never did when it really counted. "Is she coming to pick me up?" I asked. There was a pause. Small and terrible. "She can't come tonight," my dad said.
Rain.
"She said you can catch the bus in the morning when it lets up." I stared at him. "So, you want me to stand outside in this storm and wait 8 hours for a bus?" "I want you to understand that choices have consequences, Claire. And maybe I have turned this over 1,000 times since. Maybe if I'd just said the word. One word. Sorry. My whole life goes a different direction. The fork is right there. But I was 14 and absolutely done, and the injustice of it was so complete and so obvious that something in me just went completely still.
"Fine," I said.
I turned around, went upstairs, grabbed my backpack, put in my journal, the book I'd been reading, The Outsiders, which felt about right, the $22 I'd saved since Christmas. I found the only rain jacket I could get my hands on in the dark, a thin windbreaker that was basically useless in real rain, and put it on. Came back downstairs. Theo wasn't pretending to read anymore. He was looking straight at me. And his face, it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't satisfied. It was something more complicated. Something almost scared. Like a kid who'd thrown a match into a dry field as a joke and was just now realizing that fields actually burn. I walked past him, past my dad,
Past my mom.
I opened the front door. The rain hit me like a wall, sound and cold all at once. The wind got me straight in the face. I felt it down to my bones. I stepped off the porch. The door clicked shut behind me. Outside, in the storm, alone. The first thing I did was walk. Fast, no direction, just moving because moving felt like having a plan, even when you didn't. If I stopped walking, I'd have to actually sit with what had just happened, and I was not ready for that. Birchwood Court was completely empty. Of course it was almost 10 at night on a Tuesday in October, raining sideways, the kind of rain that makes you question decisions on a fundamental level. The streetlights had big blurry halos around them. My windbreaker soaked through in about 90 seconds flat. I could feel the rain sliding down the back of my neck, getting under my collar. My Nikes were waterlogged inside of one block, every step making that sad, sloshy squish. I made it to the end of our street and stopped. I don't know why right there specifically. Maybe because that was as far as I could go while still pretending I had some kind of plan. I ducked under this big old oak tree at the corner, which did basically nothing against rain like this, but felt like shelter because that's what trees are supposed to be, and I let the full weight of the last few hours just land on me. My family had put me outside, in an October storm, at night, because I wouldn't say sorry for something I absolutely, 100% did not do. I kept waiting for it to shrink down to something I could handle, the way bad things usually do once you're actually standing inside them. It didn't shrink. If anything, it just kept getting bigger.
Okay.
Think, Claire. $22. A backpack. A windbreaker that had officially given up. It was Columbus, Ohio in October. The temperature was dropping fast. I thought about calling somebody. But who? I was 14. My best friend Jasmine lived clear over in Reynoldsburg. No way was I walking that far. Her cell was in my phone, but my phone was at 6% because I'd forgotten to charge it as always. My grandma on my dad's side, the one who actually might have helped me without immediately ratting me out, had moved down to Boca Raton the previous spring. There was Aunt Patricia, technically. But the second I showed up at her door, she'd be on the phone to my dad before I even got my shoes off. That call would have made everything worse, not better. I stood under that oak tree for what felt like forever. The rain found me anyway. My hair was plastered to my face. My hands were shaking, not just from cold. The thunder was directly overhead now, the lightning and the crack basically simultaneous, way too close. At some point my brain stopped running through options and just started dealing in simple survival terms.
Get somewhere dry.
Get somewhere warm. That's it. That's the whole list. I looked back down Birchwood Court. Most of the houses were dark. It was late. People had work in the morning. But one light was on. 3 houses down from ours. There was a lamp glowing in the front window. Warm and amber-colored, the kind of light that means somebody's still awake. Still up. Still there. I stood on the sidewalk looking at it for a minute. My dad's voice came back to me. Don't spend time on our property. Another crack of lightning. Way too close. I walked up the path. I knocked on the door. And what happened next took me years to fully understand. I was standing on Mrs. Evelyn Carroll's front porch, drenched, shaking, knocking on the door of the one woman on our street my dad had basically put on a permanent no-fly list, hoping she'd answer. I counted the seconds while I waited. That's what you do when you're scared and need something to hold on to.
1, 2,
3. The porch light clicked on. The chain lock slid back. The door opened. Mrs. Carroll stood there in a blue terry cloth robe, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, holding a thick paperback, looked like a mystery novel, the kind with a lighthouse on the cover. She looked at me the way most people don't look at you, not scanning, not putting on a concerned face for show, just actually taking in what was standing in front of her. She said, "Claire Marsh." Not a question, just my name, like she was confirming something she'd half expected. "Mrs. Carroll," I said. My voice cracked. I'd told myself on the way over that I wasn't going to cry, but I was so cold and so worn out that crying felt like something from a completely different world anyway. "You're soaked," she said. "Yeah," I said. "I know. Come inside." That was it. "No, oh my goodness, sweetheart, what happened?" "No, does your father know where you are?" Just, "Come inside." 2 words. Like the door had been open the whole time and I'd just been standing in the wrong spot. I stepped into her house and the warmth hit me like a wave. Not just warm but quiet, still. That specific smell of strong coffee and old books and something faintly like cedar. I stood on her entry rug dripping onto the hardwood floor and genuinely didn't know what to do with myself. She went down the hall and came back with one of those big, fluffy bath towels, the kind hotels charge extra for. Then disappeared again and came back with an Ohio State sweatshirt and a pair of fleece sweatpants. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall," she said. "Go change." I changed. The sweatshirt came way past my hips and the sweatpants had to be rolled up 3 times, but I have never in my life felt anything like I felt in that moment. Dry, warm, still. Standing in somebody else's bathroom under a working light, wrapped in borrowed clothes. When I came back out, she'd made tea. Not fancy, just regular Lipton in a plain white mug, sitting on a footstool she'd pulled up next to the couch. She was back in her armchair with her book open like none of this was a big production. She pointed at the couch. I sat down. We didn't say anything for a while. And the silence wasn't awkward. It was the silence of someone who's lived long enough to know that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is just not make somebody explain themselves right away. Finally, she said, "Do you want to talk about it, or do you want to sleep first?"
"I don't know," I said.
Honest answer. "Okay," she said, and went back to her book. I fell asleep before I finished my tea. When I woke up, there was a quilt over me. The storm had gone quiet, not gone, just softened, down to that steady low rain that comes after the worst of it passes. Her clock on the wall, one of those old-fashioned ones with the actual pendulum, read 2:17 a.m. The lamp was still on low. Mrs. Carroll's chair was empty, her reading glasses folded on the side table. I lay there in the dim quiet and thought about the difference between those two sounds. The rain you're standing in and the rain you're dry from. How it's the exact same weather and how it couldn't feel more different depending on which side of a door you're on. I didn't call my parents. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. But for the first time since before dinner, something in my chest had unclenched. Safe. I felt safe. What I didn't know was what Mrs. Carroll had been thinking before she turned off that lamp, what she was planning to offer me in the morning, and what she was eventually going to say to my dad when the time for that finally came. I woke up for real around 7. The rain had stopped. That post-storm morning light was coming through her curtains, that specific clean brightness you only get after everything's been rinsed out, like the whole world got a do-over overnight. Mrs. Carroll was already in the kitchen. I could smell scrambled eggs, toast, and drip coffee, the smell of a person who actually has a morning routine and keeps it. I sat up on the couch, and my first thought was the same one I think any kid has in that situation. Wait, did that actually happen? Did my family actually do that?
Yeah, they did.
She heard me stirring and called out, "Come eat, Han." Her kitchen was small and tidy. Yellow curtains. Herbs growing in little clay pots on the windowsill. Basil, rosemary, something with tiny purple flowers I didn't know the name of yet. She'd made scrambled eggs with whole wheat toast and OJ from the carton, not the fancy kind. She set a plate in front of me and sat across the table with her coffee. "Sleep okay?" she asked. "Yeah, actually," I said, surprised by how true it was. She nodded. "Good." Both hands wrapped around her mug. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know your family, Claire. 19 years on this street. I waited. And I know what your dad thinks of me," she added, without any bitterness to it. "Just a fact, like talking about the weather. I imagine coming here wasn't your first choice." "I didn't have a lot of options," I said. "Fair enough. You want to tell me what happened?" So I told her everything. Theo, the sailboat, the dinner table, my dad's face, walking out into the storm. No drama, no performing, just the facts, flat and straight, the way you tell things when you're too worn out to dress them up. She listened the whole way through without interrupting once. When I finished, she sat quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "What do you want to do now?" I just looked at her, because not one single person in this whole situation had asked me that. What I wanted. Like my answer might actually change something. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's okay." She looked at me real steady. "You can stay here today. Longer than that if it comes to it. I've got a guest room, and I'm not running out of eggs anytime soon." She paused. "I'm not calling your dad unless you ask me to. And I'm not pushing you to do a thing." "Why?" I said. I wasn't trying to be rude. I genuinely needed to understand it. "Why are you doing this?" "My dad." "Your dad and I got a disagreement about 6 inches of fence," she said, completely dry about it. "That has got nothing to do with you." She picked up her mug. "And because you showed up at my door in a thunderstorm at 10 o'clock at night. That's plenty of reason." I ate my eggs. They were really, really good. She put a little cream cheese in them, which I'd never had before. I make them that way now every single time. That whole day was quiet in the best possible way. She gardened in the morning. I watched from the porch for a while, and then just started helping because my hands needed something to hold on to. She read in the afternoon. She cooked dinner with a little radio on the counter playing oldies, Motown, some Fleetwood Mac, a lot of Stevie Wonder. She let me be there without making it a whole thing. No eggshells, no performance. Just space. At dinner she told me about herself. Not like a prepared speech, just regular conversation, the easy kind that happens when people aren't trying to impress each other. She taught 5th grade for 31 years, mostly at Eastwood Elementary on the other side of the district. Grew up in rural Kentucky. Poor, she said, and she was straight about what that meant. Not just tight budget poor. Actually not enough. She'd put herself through college, moved north, built a life out here. After her husband passed, she'd thought about moving to Cincinnati to be closer to her daughter, but the garden kept her here. World's full of people who'll look the other way, she said, pushing the last of her green beans around. I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to be one of them. She said it like it was nothing. Like opening her door in a storm wasn't something she'd had to choose. It was just who she was. That night, in her guest room, yellow quilt, window looking out on the garden, an actual real pillow, I lay there thinking about the fact that my parents still hadn't called. Hadn't come down the block. Hadn't knocked on the door. It hurt. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. It really, really did. But underneath that hurt was something I hadn't felt before and couldn't name yet. It took me a few years to find the right words for it. What I felt that night in that guest room was the very first time I understood, not up in my head but all the way down, that family and home are not the same thing. And that sometimes the person who pulls you in out of the rain is closer to your heart than anyone who shares your last name. I slept. And I didn't know yet that things were about to shift again. Because Mrs. Carroll wasn't done. Not even close. My dad called on the second morning. Not me, he called her landline. She told me about it over breakfast the same way she told me everything. Straight, no build-up, no drama. He'd called the night before while I was in the shower. She told him I was safe, and I'd reach out when I was ready. What did he say? I asked. He was not happy, she said. He hung up. I called him that afternoon from her kitchen phone. Short conversation, went nowhere fast.
He wanted me home right now.
I said I needed him to admit I hadn't touched that model. He said I was being dramatic. I said I needed a couple more days. He said that was not happening. I said I was staying anyway. He didn't come to the house. I still don't know exactly what that was, pride or stubbornness or just genuinely not knowing what his next move was. Probably all three. My dad was not a man who handled being wrong with any kind of grace. I ended up staying 5 days total. By the end of it, she'd walked me through the whole garden and told me what everything was. Shown me her mother's cornbread recipe by heart. Lent me a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, which I'd somehow never read, and said it had changed something in her when she was exactly my age. She'd also, quietly, without making it a production, called my school to explain the absences and talked to a guidance counselor she knew from her years in the district. When I finally went home, it was because I decided to, not because I was summoned, not because I ran out of options, because I chose to. That difference, I cannot fully explain why it mattered as much as it did, except to say that it was the first real choice I'd made about something that actually counted. Things at home weren't fixed. We didn't have some big kitchen table conversation where everyone cried and made promises. That wasn't the Marsh family style. My mom made spaghetti the night I got back, which was her version of an olive branch. My dad was stiff and distant. Theo straight up avoided my eyes for like a week. But something had shifted anyway. I had spent 5 days somewhere. I was treated like a person whose thoughts and wants were worth asking about. That recalibrated something in me permanently. I stopped making myself small. I stopped eating unfair things just to keep the peace. I started speaking up, calmly, no drama, the way I'd watched Mrs. Carroll handle everything. My dad pushed back hard on that for a while. We had a rough stretch, not gonna lie. Theo grew up, and growing up humbled him in ways I didn't expect. The charm and the tears and the perfectly timed story. That stuff works great when you're 12 and the adults around you are buying it. It runs straight into a wall in high school, when your peers can see through it. He hit that wall. Got knocked around some. It didn't fix him overnight, but something started thawing in him, slowly, over time. Mrs. Carroll and I stayed close. She came to my high school graduation. She was the first non-family call I made when I got into Ohio State. When I moved out at 18, she gave me a set of her good mixing bowls and a card that said, in her exact handwriting, "You are never the problem. You are always the point." My dad got older. The job got harder. The years do things to a person that winning arguments never can. They just quietly show you what you missed, who you should have seen more clearly, what you wasted being sure about. He didn't apologize in actual words for a long time. He showed it in smaller ways first. Asking questions he'd never bothered to ask before. Showing up when I didn't expect it. Staying on the phone longer than necessary. And then one afternoon late summer, right before I left for college, I was out front talking to Mrs. Carroll over the gate between our yards. And I heard his voice. "Evelyn." We both turned around at the same time. My dad was standing on our front porch with his hands in his pockets. He was still in his work clothes, blue-collared shirt, khakis, like he'd driven straight from the distribution center. He looked different than I was used to seeing him. Not Gerald Marsh running the dinner table like a board meeting. Something older. Less armored. More honest-looking. Mrs. Carroll just looked at him. Didn't say a word. She waited, the way she always could. "I think I owe both of you a conversation," he said. I remember exactly what that afternoon looked like. Late August. The light coming through the oak trees, all gold and tilted, the way it gets in Ohio just before summer starts turning to fall. The kind of afternoon that feels like a memory while you're still standing in it. He came down the porch steps and stopped at the gate. He looked at me first. "I've been thinking about that night," he said. "For a long time now. About what I did." He stopped. Started again. My dad had never been somebody who apologized easy. He came up in a generation that thought saying you were wrong was basically the same as losing. Watching that crack open in front of me was not the satisfying thing I'd always imagined. It was just painful. And real. "I shouldn't have put you out. Not like that. Not at all. You were 14 years old. It was raining. You were my daughter and I." He looked down at the gate latch. I chose to believe what was easier to believe.